Hey, all right. So I had this brainwave today, which was that my my intent with this is that I read the entire book this year in this format. And the thing that I realized was that that means I have to do 25 pages a month, which it's kind of yeah, well, 25 pages a month and it's May, the 5th month of the year, and by the end of the month, page 92 right now, the end of the month, I need to be, like, kind of at 125, maybe a little higher. So, I have the idea where I was like, "Look, any little, like, space I have, I'm gonna jump in, and I'm gonna start doing some reading." So, here we are. We're in the second hub, and, and this is we're in the themes, and for this page, I don't know how much of it that I'm gonna get through, and I think that there are some pages. I mean, it's like, obviously, it's taking me a long time because 'cause I'm kind of director's cutting it and I'm tangenting and all this kinda stuff, but some sections are faster than others, and the later chapters, especially the 5th and the 6th hub, I remember in the final phases of working through it that those came were real like, became, like, a lot more cohesive really quickly, so I think and their topics aren't as loaded in the upper hubs. Yeah, these lower ones are, like, carry a lot of weight with them, and they carry a lot of, like, implication, and the examination of them is particularly challenging just because we're talking about stuff that is like the fabric of our unconscious. So it's like looking at stuff that's, I think the upper hub stuff is like it's like more recognizable because it's like in conscious thought. But anyway, I'm gonna read laughter is the first section here. So in the second hub. So laughter feels good, an authentic, spontaneously arising laugh shakes our body and delights the senses. It even feels good to see or hear someone else really laugh. Laughter is contagious and can create positive attunement between people. The things we find funny have some universal themes, but what delights you is part of your unique identity. And laughing with someone builds intimacy and connection in personal and professional relationships. Real laughter can't be predicted or controlled, making it an ideal demonstration of the feel hub expression. It incorporates an element of surprise that sparks genuine joy. Of course, there's also laughter that's used to signal social agreement or to reduce an awkward moment. That is not what we're talking about here. In the second hub, laughter and giggling can be an outlet for percolating emotions that are not yet fully understood, a signal that can be misread as not taking something seriously, a lack of sensitivity, or even falsely attributed to agreement or acceptance of an awkward situation. Especially with young children. So this is one thing that's actually I'm gonna, like, kinda interrupt my own thing here, is that young children who will, like, sometimes adults will be like, "Well, they were laughing about it," and it's be and, in case it can be the case, rather, I'll say, that, if you talk with kids about kind of their giggling and their laughter about something, it's like nervous energy about something sometimes, especially when it's voltage that's beyond their capacity to be able to manage. Yeah, like when they're seeing stuff that is like maybe like the content is just like way too highly charged for them. They might start laughing. And I think that's also confusing for the child because they're like, yeah, I'm laughing about it. Because it's like, yeah, like that's like a whole thing. And that came up a few times while I was working on this. I remember with in different situations. So that's why I'm raising it here. So in the seventh hub, pause, is part of our like in the seventh hub, laughter is part of our ability to not take ourselves too seriously, which also helps to release mental rigidity. So, yeah, I remember that was like so one of the things you can imagine is this manuscript. like right now, like and even when you have even when you have the book in the ebook format, it can be like I immediately recognize because that came out first and people bought that. And and kind of like how it's hard to navigate that format is the same reason that actually some of the editing and the working on the book just took a lot of like iterating and just spending tons of time in it uh, because it was just kind of like learning the lay of the land. It's almost like the first analogy that just popped into my head was if you're a kid and you live like near the woods, how you kind of like learn the rocks and the landscape and the trees, like just learning, like kind of like remembering where things are. And laughter was one where originally I was like, yeah, this really like I knew it was in two places in the manuscript, and I knew it held two different purpose, like two different functions, because it's like it is a release, it is a discharge. But in this, from a second hub perspective, laughter is just this kind of like expression of like surprise and delight. And in kind of like its simplest form, and the fact and the second hubness, like as mentioned, is that it's unpredictable. It's the nature of it. It's not yeah, it's not timed and stuff. So it's super great for here. Okay, next. This one's a little bit heavier. Movement and coordination. So in The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, see Chapter 1, describes the lack of coordination in children affected by traumatic upbringings that he witnessed during a canoe trip. His insight was that physical coordination and grace are the products of attunement with early caregivers. Physical clumsiness and lack of coordination can be the result of poor early attunement. As I discussed earlier, attunement is synchronization between the child and mother or primary caregiver with responsiveness and awareness that teaches a child to coordinate with both itself and its environment. The nice game of catch. We can be in conversations that are out of rhythm as we interrupt and struggle to read the other person. Early attunement teaches us to trust our signals through synchronizing and coordinating with our caregivers. A consistently distracted and or inattentive parent does not support motor development and emotional attunement, and thus children may become hesitant and distrustful of their reflexes and reactions. Parents who probably didn't experience an attuned parent themselves may be distracted, impatient, performative, belittling, and focused on themselves rather than their child. With attentive and attuned parents, grace and the effortless flow of coordinated movement gets baked into the body early in life. So that's a heavy one. And and I was thinking about it the other night when I was, I live in the middle of a city, and it really occurred to me like this notion of coordination, really like what it signals to people, like as a like non-verbal indicator of your carriage and yourself. And when you think about the signals of power, which has been a topic in other stuff that I've been working on related to Parinama, is power. It moves slowly, it's deliberate, it's in control. It kind of like takes a pause and considers its movement, or it's like its next action. And the thing about lack of coordination is even like in when you think about like kind of that awkwardness of being clumsy, and just when you see lack of coordination, like seeing somebody on, like walking down the street who lacks coordination, it signals vulnerability. It's like it looks like somebody that you could kind of easily overtake because they're not like it just like I don't think I even need to like continue that sentiment. But it made me really think about how, one of the things with people who have been victimized and traumatized, how there can be that like a lot of this like repeating patterns in life of attracting like similar situations. And it's kind of like, wow, how do, kind of victimizer personalities track folks who are easy marks? And this is a point of discussion. This is just like a thought. And at the moment right now, I'm prone to feeling like pretty, like a lot, pretty like aligned with it, as and realizing that it's like, that's so there's this subtle, it's kind of like, what are they picking up on? I think there's just those subtleties, and there's other aspects of signaling confidence that I think people are watching and picking up on. And as they get closer to someone, there's a lot of the like, well, I don't know, maybe like signaling the fact that, maybe you're a person that could potentially be overtaken. And this is tricky because it's like, geez, I'm not saying it's like the thing about like deserving to have anything bad happen to you, versus having vulnerabilities that are like identifiable to people who can um, see like their physical manifestation and clock them. So I really welcome any like pushback or thoughts on that, or even just elaboration on it. I don't have like a fixed position on that, but it was just a thought last night, or I think it was last night, where it was like I saw people and I was like, yeah, it's really like that's the tell, is like people who just can't seem to like kind of take purchase of their environment. So yeah, it's heavy. This is heavy. This is heavy. And there's a lot. I mean, there's also a lot. I mean, this isn't just like a Parinama method thing. There's a lot of research related to trauma, capital T. Bessel van der Kolk certainly alludes to it, and some of his methodologies are related to, that he discusses, are related to coordination and developing greater coordination. So it's just a thought there. I'm kind of elaborating on that. Okay, I'm going to read the boundaries and differentiation. For whatever reason, my eyes aren't going all like cross-eyed. Maybe it's because it's evening. Like some of the other readings, it's literally like the weirdest thing. It's like I'm looking and it feels like one eye is going in this direction and the other is in that. And I'm like trying to read through that. And I don't know. I don't know that the glasses like help. Sometimes it almost feels like they make it worse. So, yeah. So this is yeah. Oh, oh, I don't know what to say. It's going great so far. We'll see. We'll check in a second. Okay, boundary and differentiation. The feel boundary includes the ability to be around other people without becoming absorbed in their emotions. Okay, that's another heavy one. There's also an inner containment, which helps us to avoid becoming flooded by our emotional states and to avoid becoming disconnected from reality. A young child throws a tantrum when it cannot have what it wants. Its emotions completely overwhelm and hijack the child. As we mature and develop, we can understand the transient nature of feelings and know it's unnecessary to immediately act on them, and that often waiting for the strength of an emotional reaction to pass leads to better outcomes. Oh boy. Yeah. And take a sip of my concoction of lemon juice and ginger and hot water. It's like really strong. Like a lot of all of that. Actually, a lot of everything except the water. Ooh, yeah, boundary and differentiation. I'm going to keep reading, but there's actually something uh, surprise I have to say about this. So children in a home environment that's quiet but tense can become overly attuned to the emotional states of others. They become vigilant and able to see around corners with respect to others before they develop an understanding of their own internal state. Here we go. This this high sensitivity can lead to becoming overwhelmed in social situations, and so these children prefer to limit their exposure to people because they reflexively absorb their emotions. I'm gonna read that again. This is really kind of a big one. The high sensitivity can lead to becoming overwhelmed in social situations, and so these children prefer to limit their exposure to people because they reflexively absorb their emotions. A person who is highly attuned to the emotional states of others can be drawn towards distressed or underappreciated people. Hi, that's me. Often leading to advocacy and drawing out people who need support. This can be draining if the person's own emotional boundary is unformed or porous. In the fourth hub, I discuss the continued importance of emotional differentiation. See chapter 7. So, containing emotional boundaries allows us to remain secure within ourselves rather than being anxious or avoidant in intimate relationships. A lack of boundary leaves folks vulnerable to their identity being dependent on other people in codependency and enmeshment patterns. Emotional differentiation helps us to understand that our friends and partners can have different experiences from ours, which helps to avoid getting overwhelmed or jealous or sucked into others' turmoil. When overwhelmed by people, it's an excellent practice to take personal responsibility for our own capacity and boundary rather than to incorrectly assert that someone is being objectively too much. Yes, another one. I'm going to reread that. It's when overwhelmed by people, it's an excellent practice to take personal responsibility for our own capability and boundary rather than to correctly assert that someone is being objectively too much. There's no such thing really. But oh, there's so many points here. I'm going to keep reading and then I'm going to kind of like flow back to some of this stuff. So, intimacy is the softening of our emotional boundary with someone special. Someone special. That sounded funny. I said that. Okay, in adults, physical intimacy is the apex for the expression of this hub. Sex is connection, pleasure, sensation, and attunement, and it relaxes the distinction between two people as separate. The voltage intensity of sexual activity is appropriate for a consenting adult. Invasion before a boundary forms causes profound damage. Suppose a predator invades the emotional boundary before it is formed. When this happens, a child is affected for the rest of its life, and as an adult may either leap into intimacy very quickly or avoid it entirely. Before we can allow someone into our boundary, we need to have one. This requires a somewhat stable sense of personal identity. See Chapter 6. Otherwise, we need others to supply validation. Relying on others to tell us who we are leaves us vulnerable to manipulation and to extreme devastation in breakups when intimacy ends. So I'm gonna I'm gonna take a break. I'm really gonna try to read through all the rest of this. But there's a couple really important points here, and one of them is about kind of the notion of introvert and extrovert. And, and this is like, it's like kind of a pot, there's a lot, it's like, where do you get your energy from? And one of the things about introversion is the idea that being around people needs to be like highly selected and like limiting exposure. And another framing for that is that introversion is related to this boundary not being fully formed. So, I mean, this is heavy stuff. But here, like, the notion is heavy, but like what we're pointing to here is, and like I feel like such a swell of like love in saying this as it relates to even my own experience here, is like it's confusing if we've experienced enmeshment in our early days with caregivers where we haven't experienced the differentiation. So it's like a point of confusion about how to emotionally relate to other people. And so the template for relating is about completely leaning in to how they feel versus being able to exist in a state of your own containment, of your own emotional universe, and be able to observe and be present for other people in the states that they're in, without absorbing it. And this becomes a point of confusion, like as it relates to the idea of empathy, because it's like, I think one of the other things, like people are like, I'm an empath. I think an empath is another thing where it's like anything that's like destabilizing you and disempowering you, which is, it's like if I'm around people that are having strong emotions, it's really difficult for me because I feel them with that person. And so I can't like take a lot of it. And so it's kind of been turned into like, at least how I get it, like kind of have exposure to it in my life, is it's turned into sort of like a psychic condition of, sort of like a, maybe like almost like a new age psychic condition that's like, I'm an empath, or I'm an introvert. And the thing I just want to introduce, and I don't want to be like challenging that and making anyone feel bad for like these designations that really do help us understand parts of ourselves. And they do help. I think like the ideas of introversion and like empath are very helpful in trying to make sense of the fact that situations with people that are having a lot of emotions are like hard to navigate and hard to be around because they're either really easily absorbed, or that like we have to enter, like we just sort of naturally enter into the state that they're in. And so I would think, with a little bit of consciousness, and also, one of the central things in Parinoma method is that we ultimately really, um, like the relationship we have with ourselves is reduces the need to feel like we have to prove we're a good person. Like this is the thing in the second hub too that keeps coming up, is like these are things like, am I a good or bad person? And a lot of this is like about these early hubs is about the containment of these specific boundaries, like the physical boundary, the emotional boundary, like, and so the emotional boundary is the boundary of this hub. And it's very transformative. It's like transformational to bring awareness into like the repairing and the like conscious reclamation of this component of ourselves, because it shifts like with relative ease. Like, because the thing is that as soon as it's instituted, the notion of having some separation from people and realizing that it's like they can be having a different experience than you that's like high voltage. And it doesn't mean that in order to connect with them and sympathize with them, you also have to have those feelings as well. So I'm going to keep reading. It's really good. It feels like it's really, I really am like this. I get a lot out of this. I hope you do too. Oh my God. Okay. Children benefit from the guidance and support of a responsible, mature adult. When these aren't provided in the home, kids depend on peer relationships for emotional fulfillment and insight. Physician and addiction expert Gabor Mate writes in The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, kids are not cruel by nature, but they are immature. If peers or adults who are at the same developmental stage as us play a role in raising us, there's no context or perspective to support maturation. Furthermore, when we're young, the only perspective we have is our earlier childhood, but it's all we knew. And as children, we often mistake it for wisdom. So this is also, like the second hub deals with a lot of stuff that like has like a lot of heavy load because it is related to predation, and especially in relationships, certainly when I was younger and, had relationships with older men, that my understanding of what was happening was lack context. It lacks context. You feel like you have full purchase of yourself and your situation. So it is hard to know, and if you're kind of being like raised by kind of quorum of your peers, and this is like happening a lot of times in, teenage years, is that it feels really like adults are out of touch and kids like know what's actually going on, right? I mean, like we all relate to that. But like as Gabor Mate writes about, he actually wrote an entire book about the importance of adults raising children. And I picked kind of like oddly, like probably not the highest insight as it relates to like what he wrote about, but I thought it was a really important note that kids are not cruel, but they're immature. And also, so it's like to look at that from our own experiences with kids that like kind of may have shaped us, and also with ourselves. A lot of this is like giving yourself a break about past experiences and past behaviors. And, yeah, the whole like balancing consequence and also just releasing stuff. Okay, so a sign of a developed boundary is the ability to say no when something is enough. God, it's really a big one. Based solely on your own assessment of the situation. Yeah, let's do that again. Yeah. A sign of a developed boundary is the ability to say no when something is enough, based solely on your own assessment of the situation. A developed boundary is semi-permeable, can intercept invasion, and allows entrance to the right people. However, a boundary becomes a protective wall when we reflexively reject change, saying no to almost everything new. A protective boundary can be a survival adaptation and can become physical vigilance and heightened defensiveness, with an emotional wall keeping people at a distance. An inability to understand or respect boundaries with other people can result in unintentional and oblivious intrusive behavior. Someone who's unsettling, creepy, is often someone who does not respect our boundaries. By the simplest explanation, a creep is a boundary invader. Gosh, I'm like really like feeling this right now, but I know. Like this point of boundary differentiation, I mean, this is another thing where it's like I really look forward to forums where this is a discussion. Um, just like like I have one-off discussions about some of this stuff, but these two columns. I mean, this like between 92 and 93. There's so much in here. And there's so much that relates to just bringing consciousness to facets of ourself just enough so that they become addressable. Yeah, I'll say that one of the things is it is absolutely life-changing to if you have not had a strong emotional boundary, um, it is life-changing to understand what it means to actually contain oneself and one's feelings, and for those to actually be like their own phenomenon outside of what someone else is going through. I think I write about this later, which is that there are folks who really consider like if like so like for folks who have second hub adaptations that usually but not always, who are who are inflating, but it can be both, is that there's a sense of like if you do not dip in with them with their like emotional state, if you do not become like, if they're hysterical, if you don't become hysterical, if they're like whatever state they're in that's super activated, if you don't join them, if they're outraged, if you don't join their outrage, if they're like, one of the things with that is that's like, yeah, that's a common sort of like almost like a codependency that can happen in all sorts of relationships, friendships, colleagues, intimate relationships. But that expectation that somebody's gonna have like really like have the exact same emotion as you or express it. And so with the boundary, one of the things is you can kind of like hold space for a person and be empathetic, but you don't like lean into getting into the same feeling state that they are, like as a sign of like loyalty or solidarity. And it's really important. And it's also it becomes really noticeable about what relationships like are demanding and requiring of that. I'm going to read this last part. It's probably the longest I've ever been able to go. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to run with it, make some progress here. So hidden self and projection. So, similar to how plants grow towards any light when placed in dark corners, the conditions of our lives shape us. All living things adapt to survive. Babies instinctively learn to repeat the behaviors that gain them the most favorable response, pruning natural predispositions to gain nurture and to get their needs met. In one home, we may learn that we get picked up if we scream and cry. In another, we may learn that screaming and crying get punished and we adapt to be more agreeable. This initial adaptation to the family and later to social relationships will continue to evolve, but stems from our earliest patterns as an outcome of two variables: who we are naturally and how our environment responded to us, nature and nurture. There's no shame in surviving and adapting. Adaptations are not sinister or dark when they're occurring, but when they hide too much of who we naturally are, they begin to change who we think we are. And because whatever threat we experienced was true when the hiding occurred, we subconsciously fear and consider a piece of our true nature dangerous to our survival. There may be a surge of disgust or resentment when we see others authentically thriving in their ideal conditions. If we had to hide things we see others showing, the adult responses can range from "that's just wrong," "that's irresponsible," and "that's disgusting," to "they deserve bad things to happen to them." But dig just a little deeper, and you hear the voice of an inner child say, "That's not fair." What we want for ourselves is buried under layers of social approval seeking hurt, protection, and resentment. The voice that says that's not fair is young. The adult voice that is overbuilt that is an overbuild of this says things like, I had to make sacrifices. I must work and be responsible. I was not accepted as myself, and I had to suck it up. Yeah. It's a really important one. If you have the book, I really suggest 93. I was like looking at this one, just spending a little time with it. Because it's the that's not fair part about it's like seeing that other people can be free. And, and if you really just explore it, it's like, well, they're not being irresponsible. They need to do this, they need to do that, or that. Like any of these examples is, it's really natural to have these arise in ourselves. We're all socially developed in these societies that we're in. Um, and so looking for what the seed of that is that arises, if you can find it. Um, it's very liberating. So the hidden self begins to get buried long before episodic memory is operational, cataloged in a subconscious language of reflex, aversion, and where we choose to direct our attention. Keep in mind that the early reflex that does the hiding does it to protect us. It wants us to survive and doesn't understand time. So it doesn't recognize when the immediate threat has either passed or has been reduced. We bury the hidden self under strong responses like disgust and aversion. Anodate Judith writes, through judgment, we attempt to remove stimuli that might awaken our shadow. I'm going to read that again. So good. We bury the hidden self under strong responses like disgust and aversion. So in the Day of Judith writes, through judgment, we attempt to remove stimuli that might awaken our shadow. So the things we judge, we're trying to push away from ourselves, and we're trying to judge them and like reduce any nuance in what they are, like turn them completely binary, good or bad. And what's good or bad, we've in a state of judgment, there's a thing where it's like it's just bad, right? So the judgment is just bad, so it pushes it away. So it's very easy treatment of actually getting rid of the stimuli that awakens the shadow. So if we seek to surface and integrate our hidden self, strong reactions to matters not concerning us, combined with complex rationalizations, are an excellent place to excavate. It's another one. I mean, that's really like honestly, if we seek to surface and integrate our hidden self, strong reactions. So this goes back to this point: strong reactions to matters not concerning us, combined with complex rationalizations, are an excellent place to excavate, to find the parts of ourselves that we've hidden from ourselves. The initial excavation can be anxiety provoking and destabilizing. The reward for seeking out and accepting our hidden self is the ease and the effortless charisma of self acceptance. It takes a lot of energy to keep a secret. And even if we don't know we keep it, our bodies hold the information. We see our hidden self everywhere we look. It wants us to reconnect with it, our true nature, by showing it to us in everything we see, revealing itself in what we project on others. But it gets intercepted by the same protective reflexes that initially kept us safe. And this requires the recruiting of consciousness. That needs a little unpacking, and I'm like here for you on this. The repressed hidden self can become dangerous when it leads to behavior that invades abuse, that invades, abuses, or otherwise interferes with others who are openly expressing themselves. You're not necessarily gay if you have a substantial adverse reaction to LGBTQ plus. You may be resenting the freedom of living bravely in personal truth. Still, there may be something about your own sexuality or gender identity that you're hiding from yourself. We didn't hide parts of ourselves because they're objectively wrong. We hid them because they didn't support our safety during early years. I discuss more about the hidden self, projection, and social personas in the Connect Hub, chapter 7. So I think this is the most I've ever read. Maybe not. Feels like the most. But I just like a really important point here. A really important point is that like when we look at something, our interpretation, the whole thing of like we're meaning making machines. It's like you see somebody in like say a red hoodie walking down the street, right? And what you see about that, it's like if you look and you go, oh, it's like dirty, or they look out of it, or that's like something. I'm just trying to think like, you notice there's sparkling eyes, or you notice that, kind of they seem funny, like they could there's something about them, like whatever it is. It's kind of like when we look at somebody, what we see is actually kind of like, and the word choice is like is like a little too, it's not choice because it's reflexive. Like we reflexively see what we see. And those reflexes I'm proposing here are really arising from the inner parts of ourselves that are actually trying to surface something. Like they're trying to tell us something about the parts of ourselves that are hidden. But that's another whole other discussion. So this was a long one. Thank you for coming along. I'm gonna go. Yeah, actually I went longer than I planned on. But I loved it. And thank you for coming along for the ride. As always, I look really sleepy. I didn't realize that I wasn't looking at myself that much. But yeah, thank you for liking, thank you for watching, thank you for commenting. Um, it means a lot to me. I keep doing these. I guess like part of me sees the future where like I think that these will be watched like like right now there's like they all get watched a little bit, but I feel like as a resource for people in the future as this book begins to pick up momentum as it's doing right now, just offering this as a particular type of companion for it. It's not honestly the most advanced form of offering support in this process because it's kind of just like more like reading it along, like reading it with a friend, hopefully. And so, the things that I'm working on are about really I wouldn't say compressing, but more like teasing out specific aspects of how to organize one's own individual practice with this book. But yeah, to all the OGs out here watching, I'm really grateful for you, and it means everything to me to have others that are along for the ride. It's a bunch of people recently reached out to me reading the preface and found the preface really emotionally like evocative, and that real like for me that is such a resonant point because like it's so resonant because it was the last part of the book that I wrote it on that day, the 28th, I think it was, of April. And what I was writing about was that the process of creating the methodology and writing the book was like I always knew the future, like future you who's seeing this, like that we were going to be able to connect. There's this connection that was going to happen. I just knew it, like, and it was a really unique experience to completely sort of like leave society, I guess you could say, and really dive into all of this. But so it's like really like for people to tell me that reading it, like they feel that, like like it's something really special, and it's something we're sharing right now because right now, like if I look at the monitor, there's nobody watching this, so I'm talking to a future you. Like you are in the future, you're somewhere else right now. If you're watching this when I was talking to you, you were doing something else, and that's kind of like it's kind of a magical thing. It's kind of a magical thing. And I think it's also something about creation in general, which is that it's creating out of a place of conviction and integrity with a knowing that it will find its way and that it's not beholden to me when people find this. It's not beholden to me, like when people connect with this, just knowing that it's here and that they will. Like we're doing it right now. We're traversing over time to connect right now. If you're watching this. So anyway, thank you for coming along for the ride. Special shout out to Rachel, always Mira. Anyone, all comments get answered, and yeah, I love you and appreciate you. And I'll see you next time. All right, bye.